during a lavish family dinner at my son and daughter-in-law's house. I sat there smiling, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my gut that their perfect life was actually a lie. I excused myself to the kitchen just to get a glass of water and escape the tension, but what I discovered hidden in their trash didn't just break my heart. It made me fear for my safety and reach for my phone to call 911. Before we find out what happened, please subscribe to the channel and let us know which city you are listening from in the comments. They say a mother always knows. It's a cliche, I know. People throw that phrase around whenever a woman guesses her child has a fever or knows who broke the vase in the living room. But after 68 years on this earth, and 30 years spent managing corporate accounts, where a single missing decimal point could ruin a quarter, I've learned that intuition isn't magic. It isn't some mystical power bestowed upon us when we give birth. Intuition is data. It is your brain noticing the tiny, microscopic details that your conscious mind hasn't caught up with yet. It's the silence when there should be noise. It's the generic greeting card when there used to be extravagant gifts. It's the feeling that the ground beneath you is shifting, even when the floor looks perfectly polished. My name is Jacqueline Kaufman. I live a quiet life now. I earned it. I spent decades waking up at 5 in the morning, putting on a suit, and managing teams of people who wanted my job. I saved, I invested, and I retired comfortably here in Orange County. I don't ask for much. I have my garden, my books, and my peace of mind. But that peace was disturbed the moment my phone rang last Tuesday morning. It was my son, Kenneth. Now, Kenneth is a good boy. He's always been ambitious, perhaps a little too ambitious for his own good, but he has a good heart. He lives in Irvine, in one of those neighborhoods where the grass is legally required to be a specific shade of emerald green, and the trash cans are hidden behind cedar fences. He lives there with his wife, Pearl. Mom, he said, his voice sounding a little too bright, a little too loud. Pearl and I were thinking we haven't had you over for a proper sit-down dinner in ages. Why don't you come by tonight? She's making her roast. I paused. It was a Tuesday. Kenneth is a vice president at a logistics firm. Tuesday nights are usually for late emails and conference calls with overseas partners. He never hosts dinners on Tuesdays. Tonight, I asked, checking my calendar, even though I knew it was empty. Is everything all right, Kenny? Everything is great, Mom, he insisted. Just family time. We miss you. Come around 6. I agreed. Of course. You don't say no to your children when they reach out. But as I hung up the phone, I didn't feel that warm, fuzzy feeling of being wanted. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. I went to my closet to choose an outfit. I picked a nice blouse, something simple but elegant. As I dressed, my eyes drifted to the dresser where I kept my birthday cards. My birthday was just last month. For the last 10 years, Kenneth and Pearl have treated my birthday like a national holiday. They would send a limo or buy me a designer handbag I'd never use or treat me to a dinner where the bill could feed a family of 4 for a month. They liked to flash their money. It was their way of showing love, I suppose, or perhaps their way of showing everyone else how well they were doing. But this year, the card on my dresser was generic. It was a $3 card from the drugstore rack. The message inside was just, "Happy birthday, Mom. Love, Ken and Pearl." No gift, no dinner, no phone call at midnight. When I asked about it later, Kenneth mumbled something about being swamped at the office and promised to make it up to me. I'm not a greedy woman. I don't need handbags or limos. I have enough money of my own. But in my line of work, you look for patterns. And when a pattern breaks abruptly, it means something has changed in the system. Kenneth hadn't just forgotten. He had cut back. Drastically. I pushed the thought away. Maybe I was just being a cynical old woman. Maybe they really just wanted to see me. I drove my reliable Honda Accord down the 405 freeway toward Irvine. The traffic was thick, as always, but I made good time. As I turned into their subdivision, the Groves, I looked at the houses passing by. They were beautiful, massive structures with Spanish tile roofs and 3-car garages. It's easy to be fooled by places like this. It's easy to think that everyone behind those heavy oak doors is happy and secure. But I know that debt wears a very nice suit. I know that the biggest bankruptcies often happen in the biggest houses. I pulled into Kenneth's driveway at exactly 6 o'clock. Punctuality is a habit I never broke. The house looked magnificent. The landscaping was freshly manicured. The white roses were in bloom, and the exterior lights were casting a warm, welcoming glow against the twilight. I could smell rosemary and garlic wafting from the kitchen vent. It painted a perfect picture of domestic success. Kenneth's car was parked in the driveway, which was unusual. He usually kept his prized Mercedes S-Class in the garage away from the dust and the sun. He treated that car better than he treated his own health. It was his status symbol, his way of telling the world he had arrived. I parked behind it and gathered my purse. As I walked past his car, heading for the front door, something caught my eye. I stopped. I looked down at the rear tire of his Mercedes. The car was gleaming. It had been washed and waxed recently, but the tire was bald. I don't mean it was a little worn down. I mean the tread was completely gone. The rubber was smooth, almost shiny, and I could see the faint, dangerous glint of the steel belt starting to show through on the inner edge. I stood there on the driveway, staring at that tire, and my stomach dropped. You have to understand something about men, like Kenneth. Men who wear tailored suits and watches that cost as much as a small car do not drive on bald tires. They are obsessed with safety and performance. They take their cars to the dealership for every minor squeak. A set of tires for that car would cost maybe $800, perhaps $1,000. For a man who makes Kenneth's salary, that is nothing. That is pocket change. Unless he didn't have the pocket change. A wealthy man might have a dirty car because he's busy. But a wealthy man never has a dangerous car. Neglecting maintenance like that isn't a sign of busyness. It's a sign of cash flow paralysis. It means you are choosing between the car payment and the car maintenance because you can't afford both. I looked up at the house. It still looked perfect. The warm light still spilled from the windows. I could hear faint music playing from inside, but the illusion had cracked. That single bald tire told me a different story than the one Kenneth was trying to sell me over the phone. He wasn't swamped. He was drowning. I felt a sudden urge to get back in my car and drive home. I didn't want to walk into whatever drama was waiting for me behind that door. I wanted to go back to my quiet living room and pretend I didn't see what I just saw. But I'm his mother, and if he was drowning, I couldn't just leave him in the water, even if he was the one who jumped in. I took a deep breath, clutching the strap of my purse tighter. I adjusted my jacket, smoothed down my skirt, and forced the worry off my face. I needed to be smart tonight. If they were hiding financial trouble, they wouldn't admit it easily. They would lie. They would deflect. They would pretend everything was fine until the bank took the keys. I needed to see just how deep the hole was. I walked up the stone path to the front door. I didn't ring the bell immediately. I stood there for a moment, listening. I heard Pearl's voice. She sounded high-pitched, tense. Then Kenneth's voice, lower, soothing. Then silence. I pressed the doorbell. Ding dong. I put a smile on my face. Not my real smile, but the one I used to wear in boardrooms when I knew the quarterly report was going to be a disaster, but I had to keep the investors calm. I was ready to play my part. I was the doting mother coming for dinner, but my eyes were wide open now. The door swung open. "Mom!" Kenneth exclaimed, opening his arms wide. He looked handsome in his casual polo shirt and slacks. He hugged me, holding on a little too tight, a little too long. "I'm so glad you came. I wouldn't miss it. I lied." He pulled back and smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were tired. There were new lines around them that hadn't been there a few months ago. Come in, come in." He ushered me inside. "Pearl is just finishing up in the kitchen. Wine." "Just water for now," I said, stepping into the foyer. The house was cold. The air conditioning was blasting, which was strange for a mild evening. As I walked toward the dining room, I kept my eyes moving, scanning the room like I used to scan a balance sheet. I was looking for the cracks. I was looking for the bald tires of the household. And the night had only just begun. The dining room was set for a coronation, not a Tuesday night dinner with family. That was my first thought as I walked in. Pearl had pulled out the good china, the Royal Doulton set with the gold rim that we had given them as a wedding gift 10 years ago. I knew for a fact that those plates were hand wash only, and Pearl hated washing dishes. Seeing them on the table sent a clear message. We are trying very, very hard to impress you. There were linen napkins folded into swans. There were crystal goblets that caught the light of the chandelier. In the center of the table sat a massive floral arrangement that looked like it had been delivered an hour ago. It was too tall. You had to crane your neck just to see the person sitting across from you. "Sit here, Mom," Pearl said, guiding me to the head of the table. Usually, Kenneth sat at the head. Placing me there felt strategic. It was a position of honor. Yes, but it also felt like I was being placed on a podium. Or perhaps the witness stand. "You look absolutely stunning, Jacqueline," Pearl gushed, pulling my chair out for me. "Doesn't she look young, Kenny? That color does wonders for your skin. I wish I'll look half as good as you when I'm, well, you know." "Thank you, Pearl," I said, smoothing my napkin over my lap. The compliment felt sticky, like syrup spilled on a counter. Pearl and I have always had a cordial relationship, but she isn't naturally affectionate. She's cool, distant, more interested in her Pilates schedule than my wardrobe. Tonight, she was hovering. She touched my shoulder. She patted my hand. She filled my water glass before I had even taken a sip. Kenneth sat to my right. He looked agitated. He picked up his fork, put it down, adjusted his collar, and then reached for the wine bottle. "Cabernet," he said, pouring a generous amount into my glass without asking. "It's a 2018. Very smooth. Drink up, Mom. You deserve to relax." "I'm quite relaxed, Kenneth," I said softly. Pearl brought out the food. A pot roast, glazed carrots, garlic mashed potatoes. It smelled divine, but as I looked at the abundance of food, I couldn't help but think about the bald tire in the driveway. $100 worth of beef on the table, but zero tread on the road. The math wasn't adding up. We began to eat. The clinking of silver against china was the only sound for a moment. I took a bite of the roast. It was tender, cooked perfectly. So Kenneth started clearing his throat. He didn't look at me. He looked at his potatoes. "How are things over in your neck of the woods?" "The neighborhood quiet." "Very quiet," I said. "Mrs. Gable, next door, finally sold her house. She moved to Arizona." Kenneth's head snapped up. "Sold it? Really? Did she get a good price?" "I believe so," I replied. "The market is still decent." "Decent? It's volatile, Mom," Kenneth said, his voice taking on a lecture-like quality. He leaned in, ignoring his food. "Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. The economy right now, it's scary. Inflation is eating up cash savings like termites. Have you seen the latest CPI reports?" I took a slow sip of wine. "I watch the news, Kenneth." "Right, but watching is different from understanding the long-term impact," he pressed. "People on fixed incomes are the ones who get hurt the most. I worry about you, Mom. I really do." Keeping your money in traditional savings accounts right now is basically losing money every day. I set my glass down. Here it comes. I spent 30 years in corporate management. I know the tone of a sales pitch. I know the cadence of a man trying to manufacture urgency where there is none. Kenneth wasn't asking about my life. He was building a case. He was creating a problem so he could offer a solution. I'm comfortable, Kenneth, I said firmly. My pension is solid, and my investments are conservative. Conservative is just another word for stagnant, he countered quickly. Look, I'm in the industry. I see trends before the general public does. There's a correction coming. A big one. And liquid assets are going to be king. Pearl chimed in, her voice high and sugary. Kenny just wants to make sure you're taken care of. Jacqueline, we'd hate to see you struggle in a few years because the market crashed. Struggle? I own my home. I have zero debt. I have a travel fund I haven't even touched. The idea of me struggling was laughable, especially coming from a man driving a dangerous car. But I didn't say that. I needed to see where they were going with this. That's very sweet of you both, I said, playing the part of the slightly confused elderly mother. But my financial advisor says I'm on track. Kenneth scoffed. Advisors make money when you stay put. Family looks out for your actual interests. He took a large gulp of wine. Speaking of the house, is it fully paid off now? I know you had that small balance left a few years ago. The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Yes, I lied. I had paid it off 5 years ago, but I hesitated. Why do you ask? Just estate planning, Kenneth said, waving his hand dismissively, though his eyes were locked on mine. It's smart to leverage equity, Mom. Sitting on a paid-off house is dead capital. If you unlocked that equity, you could invest it in something with a much higher yield. Pearl, and I have found this incredible opportunity. Private equity. Returns are triple what the bank gives you. There it was. The pivot. It wasn't a family dinner. It was a fundraising event. I looked at my son. He was sweating slightly on his upper lip. He was cutting his meat with too much force. This wasn't just greed. Greed is patient. This was desperation. Desperation is sloppy. He needed money, and he needed it now. He didn't just want me to invest. He wanted me to mortgage my home, my sanctuary, and hand him the cash. I felt a coldness spread through my chest. It's a terrible feeling to realize you are being handled by your own child. He didn't see me as his mother in that moment. He saw me as a bank vault he needed to crack open. He thought I was old enough to be scared by big words like inflation and market correction. He thought I was lonely enough to pay for his attention with a check. I'm not interested in new investments, Kenneth, I said, keeping my voice level. I'm at the stage of life where I prefer safety over yield. Safety is an illusion. Kenneth snapped. His voice was too loud. Pearl quickly reached out and touched his arm. Kenny, honey, don't shout. Mom just doesn't understand the complexity of it. She turned to me, her smile tight. Jacqueline, we just found out about this program. It's exclusive. We thought of you immediately because we love you. We don't want you to miss out. I'm full, I said, pushing my plate away. The food suddenly tasted like sawdust. Mom, please, Kenneth said, his voice dropping to a whisper. It sounded almost like a plea. I'm trying to help you. I know you are, I said, lying again. I looked around the room. The expensive curtains, the designer furniture, the crystal glasses. It was all a stage set, a thin, glittering veneer pasted over a crumbling foundation. They were broke. I knew it in my bones. And they were looking at me to bail them out, but they weren't honest enough to ask for help. Instead, they were trying to trick me out of my security. I need to use the ladies' room, I said, standing up. Of course, Pearl said, standing up halfway. Do you need help? I know the way, Pearl, I said. I'm not invalid. I walked out of the dining room, feeling their eyes on my back. I could feel the tension radiating off them. They were probably whispering right now, strategizing, wondering why I wasn't biting the hook. I walked down the hallway, past the framed photos of the grandchildren. Everyone looked so happy in the pictures. But pictures are just moments frozen in time. They don't show you what happens when the camera stops clicking. I reached the kitchen. I didn't need the restroom. I needed water, and I needed a moment to think. I needed to breathe without the suffocating scent of Pearl's perfume and Kenneth's anxiety. I walked into the kitchen. It was pristine, just like the rest of the house. White marble counters, stainless steel appliances that looked like they belonged in a restaurant. But as I walked toward the sink to fill a glass of water, I noticed something. The trash can. It was a stainless steel pedal bin. The lid was slightly askew, caught on something. I don't know why I looked. Maybe it was just habit. Maybe it was fate. But I saw the corner of a thick, heavy envelope sticking out. It wasn't a gum wrapper or a vegetable peeling. It was document paper. The kind lawyers use. I stood there, the water running in the sink, staring at the trash can. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The dinner had been a trap. A sweet, expensive trap. But traps only work if the animal doesn't see the cage. And I was beginning to see the bars. The kitchen was quiet. That was the first thing I noticed. After the suffocating pressure of the dining room, the silence here felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I walked over to the sink and turned the tap on, letting the cold water run over my fingers. I needed to cool down. I needed to wash away the feeling of my son trying to hustle me out of my own life savings. I stood there for a moment, gripping the edge of the counter. My knuckles were white. I wasn't angry yet. I was just disappointed. Profoundly, deeply disappointed. I looked around the room. It was a showroom kitchen. Granite countertops that sparkled under the recessed lighting, a refrigerator that probably cost more than my first car, and a 6-burner stove that looked like it had never been used for anything more ambitious than boiling water. It was all designed to say, "We made it." But I knew better now. I knew about the bald tire. I knew about the cheap birthday card. And I knew that people who are truly wealthy don't push their mothers to mortgage their paid-off homes over a pot roast dinner. I reached for a glass from the cupboard, my eyes scanning the room aimlessly. That's when my gaze landed on the trash can. It was a sleek, stainless steel pedal bin, tucked neatly into a recess at the end of the island. But something was wrong with it. In a house where Pearl fluffed the pillows every time someone stood up, the lid of the trash can was caught. It wasn't closing all the way. A piece of white paper was jammed into the hinge, keeping it propped open by an inch. It was a tiny detail. Most people wouldn't have looked twice. But I spent 30 years auditing departments that tried to hide their losses in the footnotes. I notice when things don't close properly. I took a sip of water, my eyes still fixed on that sliver of white paper. "Don't look," a voice in my head whispered. "Just go back to the table. Finish your dinner. Go home." But I couldn't. The itch was too strong. I glanced toward the doorway leading to the dining room. I could hear the low murmur of Kenneth's voice. He was probably debriefing Pearl, telling her I was being stubborn, planning their next angle of attack. I had a minute, maybe 2. I set my glass down on the counter without a sound. I walked over to the bin and stepped on the pedal. The lid popped open. The bin was mostly empty, which meant they had taken the trash out right before I arrived. They wanted the house to be perfect, but right on top, hastily shoved down, was a pile of mail. It looked like someone had grabbed a stack of envelopes off the counter and cleared them away in a panic to tidy up. I saw the paper that had jammed the lid. It wasn't a junk flyer. It was thick, high-quality paper, the kind banks use. I reached in. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs, but my hand was steady. I pulled the crumpled ball of paper out and smoothed it flat on the granite countertop. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was a letter from a bank. At the top, in bold, terrifying red letters, it said, "Notice of default and intent to foreclose." I read the lines, my eyes darting across the legal jargon. It was addressed to Kenneth and Pearl. They were 6 months behind on their mortgage. 6 months. The bank was demanding immediate payment of the arrears, or the property would be sold at auction in 30 days. 30 days. I looked at the date on the letter. It was 2 weeks old. They had 2 weeks left before this perfect house was put on the auction block. The bald tire made sense now. The desperation at dinner made sense. They weren't investing in a new opportunity. They were drowning. They were about to lose everything. The house, the image, the status. They were trying to get me to unlock the equity in my home to pay off their arrears. They wanted my money to plug the hole in their sinking ship. A wave of nausea hit me. My own son. He sat there pouring me wine, smiling while he was hiding the fact that he was bankrupt. He was going to take my safety net to save his ego. But I wasn't done. As I moved to crumble the foreclosure notice back up, I noticed another document sticking to the bottom of it. It had been stapled to the back of a utility bill, perhaps by accident, or perhaps to keep it together in the pile. I peeled it off. This document wasn't from a bank. It was a legal draft. I recognized the layout immediately. I had signed one for my own mother years ago when she developed dementia. Durable power of attorney. I read the text, and the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Principal, Jacqueline Kaufman. Agent, Kenneth Kaufman. It was filled out. My name was typed neatly in the principal line. Kenneth's name was in the agent line. I scanned the clauses. It wasn't a limited power of attorney for a specific transaction. It was a general durable power of attorney. It granted the agent, my son, full authority to manage my banking, sell my real estate, liquidate my investments, and make financial decisions on my behalf. It granted him total control. All it needed was my signature. I realized then what the plan was. They weren't just going to ask me for a loan. If I had agreed to their investment scheme at dinner, this document would have appeared. They would have slipped it in among the other papers. Just a formality, Mom. Just so we can manage the account for you. Standard procedure. They were going to trick me into signing away my independence. They were going to declare me incompetent or simply use this document to drain my accounts dry to save themselves. They were willing to strip me bare, leave me with nothing just to keep their names on a deed to a house they couldn't afford. I stared at the paper. I waited for the tears to come. I waited for the heartbreak, but it didn't come. Instead, a cold, hard clarity settled over me. It was the same feeling I used to get when I fired an employee who had been stealing from the company. The emotion evaporates, replaced by pure, icy logic. He wasn't my little boy right now. He was a threat. He was a predator. And I was the prey. But he had forgotten who raised him. He had forgotten that I managed budgets bigger than his entire lifetime earnings before he even learned to tie his shoes. I didn't shake. I didn't panic. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I laid the 2 documents side by side on the counter, the foreclosure notice and the power of attorney. I framed them in my camera screen. I made sure the text was legible. I made sure the date was visible. Click. I took a second photo just to be safe. Click. I checked the gallery to ensure the images were sharp. They were. Evidence secured. Then, very carefully, I restacked the papers. I crumpled the foreclosure notice exactly the way it had been. I slid the power of attorney back underneath the utility bill. I placed the entire bundle back into the trash can. I used my foot to press the trash down, just slightly, so the lid would look like it was stuck again. I wanted it to look exactly as I had found it. I couldn't let them know I knew. Not yet. If I confronted them now, in the kitchen, they would scream. They would deny it. Kenneth might get violent. Desperate men do desperate things. And he was cornered. No, I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to get out of this house safely. I walked back to the sink and picked up my glass of water. I took a long, slow drink. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window above the sink. I looked old, yes. My hair was gray. My face had lines. But my eyes were sharp. They were clear. Okay, Jacqueline, I whispered to myself. Showtime. I smoothed my skirt. I adjusted my blouse. I put the mask back on. I found a smile, a soft, oblivious, motherly smile, and plastered it onto my face. I turned around and walked out of the kitchen. I was walking back into the lion's den, but this time the lion didn't know I had a weapon. I was going to finish my dinner. I was going to play their game. And I was going to make sure they regretted the day they underestimated me. Walking back down that hallway felt like the longest commute of my life. My heart was still hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that contradicted the calm, measured click of my heels on the hardwood floor. In the kitchen, I had been a detective finding the smoking gun. Now, I had to be an actress. I had to become the very thing they thought I was, an old woman, a little slow, a little too trusting, and ready to be led. I paused just outside the dining room archway. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of their expensive candles and their lies. I smoothed the front of my blouse. I relaxed my jaw. I let my shoulders slump just a fraction of an inch. It's amazing what bad posture does to people's perception of you. If you stand tall, they see a threat. If you slouch, they see a victim. I put on my smile. It was the smile I used for neighbors I didn't like and for toddlers who showed me drawings that looked like scribbles. It was warm, wide, and completely empty behind the eyes. I stepped back into the room. Kenneth and Pearl were huddled close together at the table. Their heads were bowed, whispering furiously. The moment they saw me, they sprang apart as if they had been electric shocked. Kenneth grabbed his wine glass, nearly knocking it over. Pearl smoothed her napkin, her smile snapping back into place so fast it must have hurt her face. Everything okay, Mom? Kenneth asked. His voice was tight. He was looking at my hands, checking to see if I was holding anything. Just fine, dear, I said, my voice airy and light. Just needed a glass of water. The air is so dry this time of year, isn't it? I sat back down at the head of the table. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the now cold pot roast. I chewed slowly, letting the silence stretch. I could feel them watching me, waiting for me to bring up the investment again. They were tense, like coiled springs. They wanted to know if the fish had taken the bait. I wiped my mouth with the linen napkin and looked at my son. I let my eyes go soft, filled with a motherly affection that I currently didn't feel. You know, Kenneth, I started sighing contentedly. Standing in your beautiful kitchen just now, I was overcome with a thought. Kenneth leaned forward, eager. What thought is that? I was thinking about Mrs. Gable's son. You remember him? David. I shook my head sadly. Poor thing. He's 40 years old and still asking his mother for rent money. He's got credit card debt up to his eyeballs. Mrs. Gable told me she can't even enjoy her retirement because she's so worried he's going to end up on the street. I saw Pearl exchange a glance with Kenneth. They didn't know where I was going with this. And then I continued gesturing around the room with my fork. I look at you. I look at this magnificent house. I look at Pearl's beautiful dress. I see the cars in the driveway. I paused on the word cars. I saw Kenneth blink. He knew about that bald tire. He knew exactly what state his finances were in. It is such a relief, I said, leaning back in my chair. It is the greatest joy of my life to know that I never, ever have to worry about you. To know that you are financially secure. To know that you have built such a solid foundation that you don't need anything from anyone. The room went dead silent. It was a cruel thing to do, perhaps, to praise a drowning man for how well he is swimming. But I had to know. I had to see if there was any shred of decency left in him. If he had any conscience. This was the moment he would crack. This was the moment he would say, "Actually, Mom, things aren't going so well." But he didn't. Instead, I watched him squirm. I watched him swallow the lump in his throat. He had to agree with me. If he denied it, he admitted failure. If he admitted failure, he couldn't sell me on the idea that he was a financial genius who could manage my money better than I could. He was trapped in his own lie. We've been very blessed, Kenneth managed to say. His voice sounded strangled. "Hard work, Mom," Pearl added, though her voice lacked its usual sugar. She took a long drink of her wine. "We've worked very hard for this lifestyle. And it shows." I beamed at them. "It really does. That's why I sleep so soundly at night. I tell my friends all the time, my Kenneth is a rock. He's the wealthy one in the family now." I saw a vein throb in Kenneth's temple. He looked physically ill. The foreclosure notice I had just seen in the trash was practically burning a hole in the air between us. He knew that in 2 weeks, this rock was going to be locked out of his own home by a sheriff. That's kind of you to say. Kenneth stammered. He looked desperate to change the subject. He cleared his throat. "But even successful people need to diversify, Mom. That's why we brought up the equity opportunity. It's not about needing money. It's about maximizing potential." I laughed. A soft, dismissive, old lady laugh. "Oh, Kenneth, you're always chasing the next big thing," I said, waving my hand as if shooing away a fly. "But that's why I was so confused earlier. Why on earth would successful people like you want to bother with my little nest egg? My money is boring. It's dusty. You deal with millions. My savings must seem like pocket change to you." I watched the color drain from his face. I was using his own ego against him. I was calling his bluff. If he was as rich as he pretended to be, he wouldn't need my money. "It's not pocket change, Mom," he said quickly, too quickly, "and we aren't asking for us. We're doing this for you. We want you to have what we have." "But I have enough," I said simply. "I have my little house. I have my garden. I don't need crystal glasses or fancy cars. I'm happy." I saw Pearl's hand tighten around the stem of her wine glass until her knuckles turned white. They were losing control of the narrative. I wasn't arguing with logic. I was arguing with satisfaction. You can't sell a solution to someone who doesn't believe they have a problem. "But don't you want to leave a legacy?" Pearl asked sharply. The mask was slipping. Her tone was brittle. "Don't you want to make sure the grandchildren are taken care of?" "Oh, the boys are fine." I chirped. "They have you too. With all this wealth you've accumulated, those boys will be set for life. I don't need to worry about them at all." Kenneth looked down at his plate. He couldn't meet my eyes. He looked defeated, but also angry. It was a simmering, dangerous kind of anger. The anger of a man who feels entitled to something he is being denied. I took another sip of my wine. It tasted better now. I was enjoying this. I admit it. For a moment, I forgot the heartbreak of the betrayal and just enjoyed the power shift. For years, they had treated me like a relic, someone to be visited on holidays and managed like an obligation. They thought I was out of touch. They thought I didn't understand the modern world. But I understood the oldest rule in the book, follow the money. And right now, I was the one holding the purse strings, and they were the ones dancing. This pot roast is delicious, Pearl, I said, breaking the silence again. You must give me the recipe. Though, I suppose you probably have a private chef for parties, don't you? Pearl stared at me. Her eyes were cold. She realized then, I think, that I wasn't just being a dotty old mother. She sensed something was wrong. She sensed that I was pushing back, even if she couldn't figure out how or why. No chef, Pearl said curtly. Just me. Well, I said, wiping my mouth. It's lovely. And this house, really, Kenneth, you should be so proud. To think you did all this on your own. Kenneth looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked at me, and for a split second, I saw the little boy I used to tuck in at night. I saw the fear. He wanted to tell me. I could see it on his tongue. He wanted to say, Mom, I messed up. I lost it all. Help me. If he had said it, if he had just been honest, I would have put my checkbook on the table. I wouldn't have given him the house, but I would have helped him find a rental. I would have paid for a lawyer. I would have been his mother. But then he looked at Pearl, and he looked at the power of attorney draft that I knew was sitting in his jacket pocket, ready to be pulled out. Yeah, Kenneth said, his voice hardening. I did it all on my own, and I'm going to keep building it. That's why we need to sign those papers tonight, Mom. The game was over. The bait had been taken, chewed up, and spat out. He wasn't going to confess. He was going to double down. My smile stayed fixed on my face, but inside, the steel door slammed shut. Papers? I asked innocently. What papers? Pearl cleared the dinner plates with a little too much force. The clatter of silverware against china echoed in the tense room, like gunshots. Kenneth didn't help her. He just sat there, staring at his empty placemat, his hands clasped so tightly in front of him that his knuckles were white. He was regrouping. I knew that look. It was the same look he used to get when he hadn't studied for a math test and was trying to figure out how to fake his way through it. Dessert, Pearl announced, returning from the kitchen with a glass bowl. Tiramisu. I picked it up from that Italian bakery. You like... Oh, lovely, I said. You spoil me, Pearl. She spooned a massive portion onto my plate. It was a bribe on a saucer. Sugar and caffeine to soften the target. I took a small bite. It was delicious, rich and creamy, but I made a show of savoring it slowly, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. You know, I said, setting my spoon down and dabbing the corners of my mouth. Kenneth, your comments earlier really got me thinking. Kenneth's head snapped up. His eyes lit up with a predatory hope. He thought he had cracked me. He thought the rich, successful son act had finally worked. About the equity, he asked, leaning forward. About the investment? Well, not that specifically, I said, keeping my voice light and conversational. But about the idea that money shouldn't just sit in a bank account gathering dust. You said it should be used. It should have a purpose. Exactly. Kenneth exhaled, a smile breaking through his anxious expression. He looked at Pearl. See? I told you she'd come around. Mom, that is exactly what I mean. Wealth needs to move. It needs to work. Right. I nodded enthusiastically. And I realized at my age, I don't need more money working for me. I have everything I need. But there are so many who have nothing. Kenneth's smile faltered slightly. What do you mean? I've been reading about the local animal shelter. I lied smoothly. The one on Main Street. They are in terrible financial shape. They might have to close down. I took another bite of tiramisu, watching them over the rim of my spoon. So, I continued. I decided this morning that I'm going to make a pledge. A significant one. I'm thinking of donating $100,000 to build them a new feline recovery wing. The sound of Kenneth's fork hitting his plate was loud. It clattered onto the china and slid onto the table linen. You're going to what? He choked out. Donate it, I said, beaming at him. To the cats. Isn't that wonderful? It's exactly what you said, Kenneth. Putting the money to work. Imagine all those little kittens who will have a warm place to sleep because of the Kaufman family name. I watched the blood drain from his face. $100,000. That was probably exactly the amount he needed to stop the foreclosure auction. That was his lifeline, his salvation, and I was proposing to give it to stray cats. The torture was exquisite. Mom, Kenneth said, his voice trembling, That is a lot of money. It's for a good cause. I chirped, I'm meeting with their director on Thursday to sign the check. No, Kenneth said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. No, you are not. Excuse me? I blinked at him, feigning shock. You are not giving $100,000 to a bunch of cats, Mom. Kenneth snapped. His voice rose, cracking with panic. That is insane. That is financial suicide. Do you have any idea how hard it is to accumulate that kind of cash? It's my cash, Kenneth, I said, my voice cooling just a few degrees. And I thought you were rich. Why do you care what I do with my pocket change? Because it's irresponsible, he shouted. He stood up, knocking his chair back. The veneer of the polite, successful son was gone. The desperate, angry man was revealed. You don't just throw away family wealth like that. You have grandchildren. You have obligations. My obligation is to pay my bills, which I do. I replied calmly. Why are you shouting? Pearl stood up too. She walked around the table to stand next to Kenneth, presenting a united front. Her face wasn't sweet anymore. Her eyes were hard, calculating. She looked at me not like a mother-in-law, but like a problem that needed to be solved. Kenneth is right, Jacqueline. Pearl said, her voice dripping with condescension. We've been noticing this for a while. You're becoming impulsive. Impulsive. I repeated. Yes, irrational. Pearl continued. She crossed her arms. Talking about giving away your life savings to cats, ignoring sound investment advice from your own son who is a finance professional, it's not normal behavior, Jacqueline. It's worrying. I see, I said. So, if I give the money to you, I'm smart. If I give it to charity, I'm irrational. Is that how it works? You're twisting my words. Kenneth spat. We are talking about protecting you. You're 68 years old, Mom. You're not as sharp as you used to be. The world is complicated. Scammers are everywhere. Yes, I looked him dead in the eye. Scammers are everywhere. He didn't catch the double meaning. He was too worked up. Boys. Pearl suddenly yelled toward the living room. The two grandchildren, Leo and Sam, poked their heads in. They had been watching TV. Go to your rooms, Pearl ordered. But we haven't had dessert, Leo whined. Now, Kenneth roared. The boys jumped. I saw fear in their eyes. They scrambled away, their footsteps thumping up the stairs. A door slammed shut. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the awkward silence of the dinner. It was dangerous. The witnesses were gone. The pleasantries were over. The ambush had officially begun. Kenneth leaned over the table, placing both hands on the linen tablecloth. He loomed over me. He was a large man, and he was using his size to intimidate me. Mom, look at me, he said, his voice low and menacing. We aren't going to let you throw your money away. We aren't going to let you ruin this family's future because you want to play philanthropist. It's not your future, Kenneth, I said, clutching my napkin in my lap to stop my hands from trembling. Not from fear, but from rage. It's my money. I earned it. I saved it. And who is going to take care of you when you get sick? Pearl interjected, stepping closer to my chair. Who is going to drive you to the doctors? Who is going to manage your care? Us. We are. So you're saying I have to pay for your affection? I asked. We're saying you need management. Kenneth slammed his hand on the table. The silver jumped. You are clearly not capable of making these decisions anymore. This cat charity nonsense proves it. You are slipping, Mom. There it was. The gaslighting. The oldest trick in the book for children who want to steal from their parents. Mom is slipping. Mom is confused. Mom needs help. They were building the narrative right in front of me if I walked out of here, and they told people I was incompetent. Who would the world believe? The successful vice president's son or the old widow who wanted to give her fortune to kittens? I am perfectly capable, I said, keeping my voice steady, though my heart was racing. And I think I should leave. I pushed my chair back to stand up. Sit down, Kenneth said. It wasn't a request. I froze halfway up. Excuse me? I said sit down, Kenneth repeated. He walked around the table. So he was standing between me and the hallway. He blocked the exit. We aren't done. We need to settle this tonight. Pearl, get the folder. Pearl nodded and turned toward the sideboard. She opened a drawer and pulled out a sleek black leather folder. I knew exactly what was inside. I had seen the draft in the trash. My stomach churned. This wasn't a sales pitch anymore. This was a shakedown. You can't keep me here, Kenneth, I said, looking at the door. That is false imprisonment. Don't be dramatic, he scoffed. We're having a family discussion. Sit down, Mom. Read the papers. Sign them. Then you can go home. We're doing this for your own good. I slowly lowered myself back into the chair. Not because I was surrendering, but because I needed him to think he had won. I needed him to put that document on the table. I needed the final piece of evidence. For my own good, I repeated, my voice hollow. Yes, Pearl said, sliding the folder across the table to me. She clicked a heavy, expensive pen and placed it on top of the leather cover. Just sign it, Jacqueline. Stop fighting us. We're the only family you have. I looked at the pen. I looked at my son blocking the door. I looked at the daughter-in-law who had served me tiramisu while plotting to take my freedom. The cat and mouse game was over. The trap had snapped shut, but they had forgotten that sometimes the mouse has sharp teeth. I stared at the black leather folder sitting on the white tablecloth. It looked harmless, like a menu at an upscale restaurant. But I knew better. I knew that inside that folder lay the end of my independence. My hand reached out, trembling slightly not from frailty, but from a cocktail of adrenaline and heartbreak. I flipped the cover open. There it was. The same document I had seen hidden under the utility bill in the trash can. Durable power of attorney. The paper was crisp, heavy, and official. My name was typed out in perfect block letters. Jacqueline Kaufman. Below it, the name of the agent, Kenneth Kaufman. I ran my finger down the page, pretending to read it for the first time. It was comprehensive. It didn't just give him the ability to sign checks for me if I was in a coma. It gave him the power to sell my house, liquidate my retirement accounts, change my beneficiaries, and access my safe deposit box. It was effective immediately upon signing. It didn't require a doctor's note saying I was incapacitated. It just required ink. It's standard, Mom, Kenneth said. He had moved from blocking the doorway to standing right behind my chair. I could feel his body heat. It was suffocating. Every attorney recommends this for people your age. It's a safety net. Safety for whom? I asked quietly, not looking up from the paper. For you, Pearl chimed in. She was leaning against the sideboard, her arms crossed, watching me like a hawk. What if you fall tomorrow? What if you have a stroke? You don't want the state stepping in to manage your assets. The courts drain everything with fees. This keeps it in the family. In the family, I repeated, And by that, you mean in your bank account. Don't start with that cynicism. Kenneth snapped. He reached over my shoulder and tapped the bottom of the page. Just sign right there. We have a notary friend coming over in 10 minutes to stamp it. We'll handle the filing. You won't have to worry about a thing ever again. I looked at the signature line. It was a cliff edge. If I signed that, I was jumping off. I would be handing over 30 years of hard work to a man who couldn't even afford tires for his car. I closed the folder. The sound was soft, but in the silent room, it sounded like a gavel coming down. No, I said. The air left the room. What did you say? Kenneth asked. His voice was dangerously quiet. I turned in my chair to face him. I looked him in the eye. My son, the boy I had carried, the man I had put through college. I said, no, Kenneth, I am not signing this. I am of sound mind. I pay my bills. I manage my own life. And frankly, after the way you've behaved tonight, trying to scare me, trying to bully me, I wouldn't sign this if you were the last person on earth. I pushed my chair back and stood up. My legs felt heavy, but I forced them to work. I grabbed my purse from the floor. I'm leaving, I announced. Thank you for dinner, Pearl. It was illuminating. I took a step toward the hallway leading to the front door. Kenneth moved faster than I expected. He didn't just step in my way. He lunged. He planted his large frame squarely in the center of the archway, blocking the exit. He spread his arms out, gripping the doorframe on either side. He was 6'2". I am 5'5". He looked like a wall. You aren't going anywhere, he said. My heart hammered against my ribs. This had crossed a line. This wasn't an argument anymore. This wasn't a family squabble. Kenneth, move, I said, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and command. Let me pass. Not until you sign the paper, he said. His face was red, sweaty. The veins in his neck were bulging. You don't get it, do you? We don't have time for your stubbornness. We don't have time for you to think about it. We need that access now. Why? I demanded. Why the urgency, Kenneth? If you're so rich, why do you need my signature tonight? He broke eye contact. He looked at the floor, then back at me, his eyes wild. Because we have a liquidity issue, okay? He spat out the words. Just a temporary cash flow problem. The market turned on me. I have assets, but they're tied up. I just need a bridge. I need to access your equity to cover a margin call. I'll pay it back in 6 months. Double. A margin call? I scoffed. Or a foreclosure? He flinched. He didn't know I had seen the letter, but the word hit close to home. It doesn't matter what you call it, he yelled. We are in trouble, Mom. We are going to lose this house. We are going to lose the cars. Do you want that? Do you want your grandchildren to be homeless because you were too selfish to help? I offered to help, I said steadily. I would have helped you if you asked. But you aren't asking. You're stealing. We aren't asking anymore, Mom, Kenneth said, his voice dropping to a growl. He took a step toward me. I stepped back, bumping into the dining table. You aren't leaving this house until that document is signed. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care if we have to sit here all night. You are not walking out that door with that money sitting useless in your account while I lose everything. I looked at Pearl. She wasn't stopping him. She was watching, her face hard and cold. She was an accomplice. I realized then that I was in physical danger. This is the part of the story people don't understand until it happens to them. You think you know your family. You think there are lines they won't cross. You think he's my son, he wouldn't hurt me. But desperation changes people chemically. The man standing in front of me wasn't Kenneth. It was a stranger fueled by shame and panic. He was drowning, and he had decided that if he was going down, he was going to use me as a life raft, even if it meant holding my head underwater. This is false imprisonment, Kenneth. I said, trying to keep my voice from cracking. You are holding me against my will. That is a felony. Call it what you want, he sneered. Who are you going to tell? You're here for dinner. It's a family dispute. No one is going to arrest me for arguing with my mother. He turned his head to look at the folder on the table. Just sign the damn paper, Mom. Don't make me take your hand and force it, because I will. He meant it. I could see the violence behind his eyes. He was ready to grab my wrist. He was ready to hurt me to get what he wanted. I felt a cold sweat break out on my back. I was trapped. If I tried to push past him, he would shove me. If he shoved me, at my age, I could break a hip. I could hit my head. He could kill me by accident, and then claim I fell. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I cannot talk my way out of this. Logic wouldn't work. Guilt wouldn't work. He was past the point of reason. He was a cornered animal. I needed to change tactics. I needed to stop resisting. I needed to give him what he thought he wanted just long enough to save myself. I looked at the folder. I looked at Kenneth. I let my shoulders slump. I let the fight drain out of my face. I made myself look small, defeated, and old. Okay, I whispered. Okay, Kenneth, you win. He exhaled, his shoulders dropping an inch. Finally, Jesus, Mom, why do you have to make everything so hard? I'm sorry, I said, my voice trembling. I'm scared. It's a lot of money. It's safe, he said, stepping back slightly but still blocking the path. I promise. Just sign it. I will, I said. I put a hand to my stomach. I feel sick. All this yelling. My stomach is in knots. I think I'm going to throw up. Pearl stepped forward, looking disgusted. Great. Now she's sick. I need to use the restroom, I said, looking at Kenneth with pleading eyes. Please, just let me go to the bathroom. Then I'll sign. I promise. I just need a minute to compose myself. Kenneth studied me. He was looking for the trick, but I made sure to look pathetic. I held my stomach. I breathed shallowly. Fine, he said, stepping aside just enough to let me pass. Go, but leave your purse here. He pointed to my bag on the floor. He was smart. He didn't want me running out the back door with my car keys. Okay, I said obediently. I left my purse. I walked past him, smelling the sour sweat of his anxiety. 2 minutes, Mom, he called after me. Then we sign. I walked down the hallway, my legs shaking. I wasn't going to the bathroom to be sick. I was going to the bathroom because that was the only room in the house with a lock on the door. And inside my pocket, tucked against my hip, was the one thing he had forgotten to ask for. My phone. He thought he had one. He thought he had broken me. But as I reached for the bathroom door handle, I knew the night was far from over. He had given me an ultimatum. Now, I was going to give him a consequence. The lock on the bathroom door clicked shut. It was a soft, polite sound, barely louder than a whisper, but to me, it sounded like a bank vault ceiling. I didn't lean against the door or slide down to the floor in tears. I didn't have time for melodrama. Kenneth had given me 2 minutes. That meant I had 120 seconds to save my own life. I moved immediately to the sink. The faucet was one of those modern waterfall styles, sleek, chrome, and expensive. I turned the handle all the way to the right. The water rushed out with a loud, steady hiss. It was aggressive, splashing against the porcelain bowl. Good. I needed noise. I needed a white noise curtain to hide what I was about to say. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were trembling, but my fingers knew what to do. I didn't look at the screen. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked pale. Her lipstick was slightly smudged, but her eyes were flint. I tapped the screen. 911. Call. The line rang once, twice. 911, what is your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, professional, and detached. I brought the phone close to my lips, keeping my voice low, pitched just under the sound of the rushing water. My name is Jacqueline Kaufman, I said, reciting the information clearly. I am at 422 Cedar Grove Lane in Irvine, the Grove subdivision. Okay, Jacqueline, the operator said. What is the emergency? I am being held against my will, I said. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Saying it out loud made it real. It wasn't a family squabble anymore. It was a crime scene. My son and daughter-in-law are preventing me from leaving their home. They have physically blocked the exits. They are attempting to coerce me into signing financial documents transferring power of attorney to them. There was a brief pause on the other end. I could hear the typing of a keyboard. Are there any weapons involved, ma'am? No guns that I know of, I said. But my son is desperate. He has become physically aggressive. He threatened force if I don't sign. I feel unsafe. I need officers here immediately. Okay, help is on the way, the operator said, her tone shifting slightly. It was sharper now, more urgent. Are you in a safe place right now? I am locked in the downstairs bathroom, I replied, but I have to go back out there. If I stay in here too long, he will break the door down. Stay on the line if you can, ma'am. I can't, I said. He'll see the phone. Please just hurry. Officers have been dispatched. Do not engage with them if you can avoid it. I have to engage, I whispered. I have to stall. I hung up. I stared at the black screen of my phone. I had done it. I had crossed the Rubicon. There was no going back to Sunday dinners after this. There was no going back to being grandma. I had just called the police on my own child. The grief hit me, then sharp and sudden, like a physical blow to the chest. I wasn't grieving the son waiting in the hallway. I was grieving the memory of the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard. That boy was gone. The man outside was a stranger who would sell me for a margin call. I took a deep breath. Focus, Jacqueline. I splashed the cold water on my face. It shocked my system, sharpening my senses. I grabbed a hand towel, thick Egyptian cotton, monogrammed with a C, and patted my face dry. I couldn't look terrified. I needed to look resigned. I needed to look like a beaten woman who had accepted her fate. I flushed the toilet. The roar of the water was my cue. I turned off the sink. The silence returned, sudden and heavy. I unlocked the door. I opened it slowly. Kenneth was standing right there, leaning against the opposite wall of the hallway. He had his arms crossed. He was tapping his foot. When he saw me, he pushed off the wall, looming over me. You took your time, he muttered, checking his watch. That was 4 minutes. I told you, my stomach is upset, I said, keeping my voice small. I'm an old woman. Kenneth, things don't work as fast as they used to. He scrutinized my face. He was looking for defiance. He was looking for the fight I had shown earlier. I let my shoulders slump forward. I avoided his eyes, looking at his shoes instead. I'm ready, I said softly. Let's just get this over with. The tension in his shoulders released. He let out a long breath, a sound of relief that was insulting in its honesty. He thought he had broken me. Good, he said. He reached out, and for a second, I thought he was going to grab me. But he just patted my shoulder. It was a patronizing, heavy pat. You're making the right choice, Mom. You'll see. This is better for everyone. I didn't answer. I just walked past him, back toward the dining room. Pearl was sitting at the table, scrolling on her phone. She looked up as we entered. She didn't look relieved. She looked annoyed that it was taking this long. Is she done? Pearl asked. She's ready, Kenneth announced, guiding me back to my chair like a prison warden. Sit down, Mom. I sat. The chair felt hard. The black leather folder was still there, right where I had left it. The pen was resting on top, shining under the chandelier light. I reached out and opened the folder. The text swam before my eyes, but I didn't need to read it. I knew what it said. It said, I own you. I picked up the pen. It was heavy, a Mont Blanc. Kenneth liked expensive things, even when he was using them to commit fraud. Right there, Kenneth said, pointing to the line-marked principal's signature. And date it. Today is the 9th. I held the pen over the paper. My hand hovered. Kenneth, I said, looking up at him. He was standing close, watching the pen tip, like a hawk watches a mouse. What? Just sign it, Mom. I just want you to know, I said, my voice steady and quiet. I love you. You know that, right? No matter what happens, I have always loved you. He paused. For a flicker of a second, the mask slipped. He looked uncomfortable. Shame is a powerful thing, even when you bury it deep. He knew what he was doing was wrong. He knew it, and my love was a mirror he didn't want to look into. I know, Mom, he said gruffly. I love you too. That's why we're doing this. Now sign. Okay, I said. I lowered the pen. I touched the tip to the paper. A tiny dot of ink appeared. Then I stopped. Oh, wait, I said, lifting the pen. Does this need to be initialed on the first page too? My lawyer always makes me initial the bottom of every page. Kenneth groaned. It doesn't matter. Just the signature is fine. Are you sure? I asked, flipping the page back to the beginning. Because if it's not done right, the bank might reject it. And if they reject it, you won't get the money. That got his attention. The fear of the bank rejecting him was stronger than his impatience. Let me check, he said, snatching the folder from me. He flipped through the pages, scanning the legal boilerplate. I don't see an initial line. Hold on. I watched him read. I watched Pearl tapping her fingernails on the table. 1 minute, I thought. It's been at least 3 minutes since I called. They have to be close. It's fine, Kenneth said, shoving the folder back at me. No initials. Just the signature on the back. Stop stalling. I'm not stalling, I said. I'm being thorough. You taught me that, remember? Measure twice, cut once. I picked up the pen again. I adjusted my grip. I took a breath. I leaned in close to the paper. Kenneth, I said again. What? He exploded. Sign the paper, Mom. Is that a car? I asked, tilting my head. What? I heard a car outside. I said, is the notary here? Kenneth frowned. He turned toward the window. The heavy drapes were drawn, so he couldn't see out. It might be. I told him to come around 8. He walked over to the window. Pearl stood up too, smoothing her dress. Finally, let's get this notarized and be done with it. Kenneth pulled the curtain back just a fraction of an inch to peek out. I sat there, gripping the pen, my heart pounding in my throat. I waited. I saw Kenneth's back stiffen. I saw him freeze. Then the room was suddenly washed in a rhythmic flashing light. Blue, red, blue, red. It cut through the gap in the curtains and danced across the ceiling. Kenneth dropped the curtain as if it had burned him. He spun around. His face was the color of old ash. His eyes were wide, terrified saucers. Police, he whispered. Pearl gasped. What? There are 3 police cars in the driveway, Kenneth said, his voice trembling. He looked at me. The realization hit him. He looked at the folder. He looked at the phone in my pocket. He looked at the defeated old woman sitting at his table. You called them, he said. It wasn't a question. I didn't look down anymore. I sat up straight. I set the pen down on the table with a definitive click. I closed the folder. Yes, I said. I did. You called the cops on me? He looked like he was going to be sick. I'm your son. And I am your mother, I said, my voice ringing clear in the silent house. And I am teaching you the last lesson you will ever learn from me. You do not steal. And you do not threaten me. The doorbell rang. It wasn't the polite ding-dong from earlier. It was a heavy, authoritative pounding. Bang, bang, bang. Police. Open up. Kenneth looked at the door. He looked at me. He looked trapped. Open it, Kenneth, I said calmly. They aren't going away. He didn't move. He couldn't move. He was paralyzed by the sudden collapse of his world. So I stood up. I walked past him, past the fear and the greed and the ruined dinner. I walked to the front door and I unlocked it. I was done being the victim. It was time to be the witness. I opened the heavy oak door, and the cool night air hit my face like a blessing. Standing on the porch were two police officers, a man and a woman. Their faces were serious, bathed in the strobe light flicker of red and blue from the cruisers parked behind Kenneth's bald-tired Mercedes. Ma'am, the female officer asked, did you call 911? Before I could answer, Kenneth pushed past me. He had recovered from his shock just enough to try one last, desperate gamble. He put on his best corporate smile, the one he used to charm clients, though it looked brittle now. Officers, good evening, Kenneth said, his voice smooth but pitched a little too high. I am so sorry about this. My mother, well, she's elderly. She's been having some confusion lately. We were just having a family dinner, and she got a little agitated. There's really no emergency here. He tried to bond with the male officer, giving him a, you know how women are, look. She forgets things. She gets paranoid. We were actually just trying to help her with some paperwork for her own safety. Pearl appeared behind him, nodding vigorously. It's true. She's not herself tonight. For a moment, I saw the officers hesitate. It's a common story, isn't it? The confused old woman, the concerned children. It was the narrative they were banking on. If they could convince the police I was senile, they could keep control. I stepped forward. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood as tall as my 5'5" frame would allow, and I spoke with the authority of a woman who had managed boardrooms for 30 years. Officer, I said, my voice clear and steady. I am not confused. I am not paranoid. And I am certainly not having an episode. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I unlocked the screen and brought up the photo I had taken in the kitchen. This, I said, holding the screen up to the female officer, is a notice of default on this property. They are 6 months behind on their mortgage. And this, I swiped to the next photo, is a durable power of attorney they have been physically blocking the door to force me to sign. The officer looked at the phone. Then she looked at Kenneth. The concerned son mask crumbled. They aren't trying to help me. I continued, looking my son in the eye. They are trying to use my life savings to bail out their bankruptcy. When I refused, they held me prisoner in this dining room. I called you because I was afraid of what they would do next. The female officer turned to Kenneth. Her hand rested casually near her belt, a signal that the situation had shifted. Sir, step back. It's a misunderstanding. Kenneth stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. That paperwork is standard. She's lying. Sir, step back, the male officer repeated, louder this time. He stepped between Kenneth and me, creating a physical wall of safety. Ma'am, do you want to leave? Yes, I said, immediately. Okay, grab your things. I walked back into the dining room one last time. I picked up my purse from the floor where Kenneth had made me leave it. I looked at the table, the cold roast, the wine glasses, the pen lying on the unsigned document. It was a still life of a relationship that had died. I walked back to the door. Kenneth was arguing with the officers, trying to explain, but they weren't listening. They were taking notes. "We are filing a report for the disturbance," the officer told him. "And we are documenting this incident as a potential case of elder financial abuse. If you contact her or go near her home tonight, you will be arrested. You understand?" Kenneth didn't answer. He just stared at me. His eyes were full of hate. He blamed me. He blamed me for exposing him, for ruining his image, for not letting him drown me to save himself. "Goodbye, Kenneth," I said softly. I walked past him. I walked past Pearl, who was hiding in the shadow of the staircase, weeping silently into her hands. I walked down the stone path, past the manicured lawn that belonged to the bank, and got into my reliable Honda Accord. One of the police cars stayed until I started my engine and backed out. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. Kenneth was standing in the doorway of his big, beautiful, empty house. He looked small. I drove home in silence. My hands gripped the steering wheel, and for the first time all night, I let the tears fall. I cried for the little boy I raised. I cried for the hope that I would be taken care of in my old age. I cried because it hurts to sever a limb, even if that limb is gangrenous and killing you. But as I turned onto my street, into my quiet neighborhood where the houses were modest and the loans were paid off, the tears stopped. I pulled into my driveway. I turned off the engine. I sat there in the dark, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine. I was alone. I would be eating dinner alone tomorrow. I would likely spend Christmas alone. But I was safe. My money was safe. My dignity was safe. I learned a hard lesson tonight. We are taught that a mother's job is to protect her children at all costs. We are told to give until there is nothing left. But that is a lie. A mother's job is to raise decent human beings. And if they grow up to be wolves, you do not have to lay down and let them eat you. I got out of the car, locked the door, and walked into my house. It was quiet. It was peaceful. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. I made myself a cup of tea, sat in my favorite armchair, and watched the moon rise through the window. I had survived the trap. I had faced the truth. And I knew that no matter what happened next, I would be okay. Because I had the one thing they didn't. I had my integrity. And that is something you can't foreclose on. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks, so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life